We begin our report tonight with President Biden's secret trip to Ukraine. The president met with his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky outside of the presidential palace in Kyiv Monday. Biden vowed faithful support to the war-torn country and announced an additional $500 million in military aid. This was the first time a U.S. president traveled to a war zone without a U.S. military presence there. Charlie D'Agata in Kyiv with more.
President Biden's visit has had a huge impact, not just for the Ukrainian leaders in that room, but for the people of Ukraine. Seeing a U.S. president actually visiting here in person, it's become a difficult fight. They're taking heavy losses. They're tired. And this is a major boost for morale here. Under a cloak of secrecy and amid tight security, President Joe Biden rolled into Kyiv Central Station early this morning. A discreet start to a dramatic visit. A symbol of solidarity with President Volodymyr Zelensky, meant to boost morale in Ukraine and to direct a defiant message to Russia. The two men met for nearly 2 hours, in part discussing in detail the situation on the ground here. President Biden marked 1 year this week since the invasion began, saying many thought Kyiv would fall within days.
1 year later, Kyiv stands, and Ukraine stands. Democracy stands. The Americans stand with you, and the world stands with you.
President Zelensky expressed his gratitude to the U.S. and said, "We hope that this year, 2023, will become a year of victory." As they wrapped up President Biden's 5-hour visit, and almost on cue, air raid sirens blared as the two men walked together, triggered by a Russian fighter jet taking off in Belarus, which borders Ukraine just 60 miles to the north, even though the White House had informed Moscow of the president's visit. But they carried on to a memorial honoring the war dead, growing evidence of what President Biden today called a brutal and unjust war. We can now confirm that President Biden crossed back over into Poland earlier this evening. We expect to hear what Russian President Vladimir Putin has to say about President Biden's visit tomorrow in his own speech marking the anniversary of the invasion. John?
Charlie D'Agata in Kyiv, Ukraine. Thank you. For more on this, I'm joined by John Kirby, the coordinator for strategic communications at the National Security Council. Let me ask you, as a start, on these kinds of complicated decisions where there's a lot to weigh and a lot of risks and benefits, at the end, someone says the president must make this visit because. What is the because in that sentence?
It was the president who felt it was important for him to make this visit. And it's because we're right around now the anniversary of a year, sadly, a year of war, where the Ukrainian people have just inspired the whole world with their bravery, their courage, their determination. And it was important to the president to be there himself in Kyiv, in the capital of this war-torn country, to make it clear to President Zelensky, to the Ukrainian people, quite frankly to President Putin, that we are going to stay at the task of supporting Ukraine. Hopefully, we won't have to have another anniversary to look back on. But in the meantime, we've got to make sure that in the weeks and months ahead, Ukraine can continue to succeed on the battlefield as they have over the past year.
So it was just the anniversary and not a weakening of either support for Ukraine or concerns about a lack of support here now that this invasion has gone on for a year?
No, John, this was all about, making a point of being there on the eve of a tragic anniversary. That was really what was driving the timing here. And I would just tell you on the support issue, John, we continue to experience terrific bipartisan support in Congress. Yes, there's a few members in the House, in particular Republicans, that are skeptical of support for Ukraine. But if you talk to the leadership in the House, they'll tell you they're solidly behind moving forward. And it's clear that the American people still understand what's at stake here, which is obviously it's Ukrainian lives, which is first and foremost on our minds, but it's also this very idea of independence, and that the cost in blood and treasure could be much worse if Putin is able to succeed here.
This is a shot in the arm for Ukrainians, but it's also a shot across the bow for Putin. This is a more direct confrontation from the United States. How do you assess the national security temperature now that the president has made this visit?
Well, it's not a confrontation between the United States and Russia. That's not at all what this should be perceived as. This is about supporting Ukraine. It's standing up for their sovereignty. We don't seek a war or a conflict with Russia. And contrary to Mr. Putin's rhetoric, this isn't about the West versus Russia or NATO versus Russia or the U.S. versus Russia. This is about an unprovoked invasion, another invasion by Mr. Putin inside Ukraine. He could end this war today by just pulling his troops out and making it that simple. Now, clearly, he's not moving in that direction, which is why we've got to make sure that we're continuing to support Ukraine. So the message here today was all about support, the support that has gone on for a year and the support that will go on in weeks and months to come.
The president said that support will last as long as it takes. So what is the it in that sentence?
Well, it is when this war can end. And again, wouldn't it be great if, as long as it takes meant tomorrow, if Mr. Putin would just pull out? But obviously that's not going to happen. And so what we've got to make sure is that we're helping Ukraine succeed on the battlefield so that if and when Mr. Zelensky is ready to sit down at the table and negotiate, that he can do it with the wind at his back. He can do it with the strength of a position of a commander-in-chief who has succeeded on the battlefield and has some leverage going into those talks. Even President Zelensky will tell you, and I think he said it today, John, that he's not ready to do that. And we certainly understand. It's hard to want to sit down with Mr. Putin when your school and your hospitals and your cities are being continually shelled with cruise missiles and drones, and when your troops are still fighting it out in the Donbass. But we want to make sure that if and when he's ready to sit down, he can do so with strength.
The sentiment among Ukrainians, which you hinted at earlier, is essentially these sacrifices must be worth it, and therefore Crimea's got to be brought back into Ukraine, that anything short of that, anything short of liberation of Ukraine from under Russia would not make those sacrifices worth it. And that suggests a much longer and protracted battle.
Well, we don't know how long this is going to last. And I wish we could be perfectly predictive on this, but we don't know. It's going to be up to President Zelensky to determine what victory looks like, what success looks like, and what negotiations can look like, under what conditions and what circumstances, and what would he be willing to talk about and negotiate. He has put forward a peace proposal for what he calls a just peace. That's a good start. And our team is working with his team to see if we can operationalize that document and see if we can move that forward in the weeks and months ahead. It's a positive sign that he's thinking in those terms. But make no mistake, we don't recognize Crimea as as Russian territory. It belongs to Ukraine. We want to see all of the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine fully respected, all their territory and all their all their lands.
Quickly, John, finally, the question of China as supplying assistance to Russia. What exactly do we know, and what are the chances that might happen?
We see some worrying indications that China might be considering some lethal assistance. I won't go any further than that. So far, we know they've provided some non-lethal. They certainly are buying oil at above the price cap price. They have not condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But we are seeing some worrying indications that they might be considering some lethal assistance that would just make it easier for Mr. Putin to kill more Ukrainian people. We've communicated our concerns both privately and publicly to the Chinese.
John Kirby with the National Security Council. Thank you.
You bet.